Hi, my name is Sandy Baird, and I'm here with Robin Lloyd and Carol Urner. I'm a member of the Women's International League of Peace and Freedom, which had a very lovely conference over at Robin's Wing Farm in Rochester, Vermont this weekend. I'm here, though, to talk about the proliferation or non-proliferation of nuclear weapons with Carol Urner, who's been a longtime activist on that subject of nuclear weapons and the abolition of nuclear weapons in our world. First, though, I would like Robin, as the Burlington representative of the Women's International League of Peace and Freedom, and the fact that her family also founded that group many, many years ago during World War I, I believe. And this is Robin Lloyd to talk a little bit about the conference and about the work of WILPF. Robin.
Yes. Okay, thanks, Sandy. Yes, we had what we call a gathering, a WILPF gathering this last weekend in Rochester, Vermont, and women came from New England, and especially Carol Urner came, and it was such a pleasure to have her that I really wanted her to also speak in Burlington and speak on TV, because she doesn't call herself an expert. I call her an expert on nuclear weapons and nuclear abolition. But I also want to let you know more about WILPF. We are in our 100th anniversary right now. We were founded in 1915, and yes, my grandmother was involved in crossing the Atlantic Ocean during wartime to try to end World War I, and that's where WILPF originates. So for the 100th anniversary, where we all went to The Hague, where the women were at the very beginning, we hammered out this manifesto. And I said to people, oh my goodness, manifesto, that's so 19th century. It's, you know, what are some of the famous manifestos?
Communist Manifesto.
Yeah. Communist Manifesto.
That's the big one, Robin.
That's the big one. Okay, and so it's so 19th century. Do we really want to do a manifesto? But we worked for 3 years with women from around the world to create this, and it's a very powerful statement, I think, and you can find it on our website, wilpf.org. And
US?
read it. No, not U.S. International. Just wilpf.org and write manifesto, I guess, and read it. So it's been inspiring me for the last since it came out this May. So yeah, so we Carol came to the gathering, and here she is in Burlington. And welcome, Carol.
And Carol introduces herself as a wife and mother, which she has been most of her life. However, she has been an activist in the anti-nuclear movement for many, many years, and she has a lot to say about what's currently going on in the whole progress toward the abolition of nuclear weapons in the world. Hi, Carol. Welcome to Burlington, I guess. You're not from Burlington, are you?
No.
Okay.
I was here 60 years ago.
Wow.
To visit.
It was 60 years ago, and then what? What did you do after that?
Went overseas and worked with people who were deprived of everything, who were being oppressed, actually, by our own government.
Mm-hmm.
And that was 35 years. I was following my husband.
Mm-hmm.
He worked at the top with governments on development plans and planning for the future with their countries. And I worked at what people called the bottom,
right,
with the oppressed, the ones who were suffering the most. But sometimes I thought you should have turned it around, because the important people
well, the people with power, right?
The people with not military power, but the power that comes to us when we're open. I'm a Quaker, so I call it that of God, but you can call it anything, to conscience, to this well of passion, to this call, this concern. And they were nonviolent on the whole. It was natural to them to work nonviolently. So I worked with these movements and with these people alongside them. And since my husband was often working for the U.S. Embassy or U.S. aid program, he also worked for the United Nations and others, I went to the U.S. Embassy official when I was going to do something controversial and told them what it was. I was going to be nonviolent, and I'd be completely open. And
they let you alone.
It worked.
Right, good.
They gave me all kinds of awards.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on today in the world around nuclear weapons and nuclear power? And
well, I mean, one of the things we'd like to start with is the Marshall Islands lawsuit against the 9 nuclear powers. And you know, when I first heard Carol talk about this, I needed to know where the Marshall Islands are. I mean, it's like hundreds of little islands there, and they have suffered from 47 nuclear explosions.
67.
67 nuclear
where are
explosions.
they, the Marshall Islands?
They're north of Australia in the middle of the ocean, like a lot of little atolls, including the Bikini Atoll and others. So could you tell about that lawsuit?
Okay, but I'll say, too, that it tears my heart apart because our country, so I'll say we, were given the Marshall Islands by the United Nations as a trust territory. And we were to teach them about democracy and get them ready for working in the world we have today.
Now, when were they given to the
right
United
after
States?
the war.
Which war? World War II?
Oh, this is World War II.
Okay.
They'd been decimated by the Japanese, the invasion. But then what did the U.S. do but begin to use it for a nuclear testing ground?
And that was on Bikini, or was that?
Well, Bikini was one of the tests, but many of them were the Bikini area. And the test that was the worst was the largest hydrogen bomb we ever exploded. And that, Bikini disappeared. It's gone now. They had liberated the island. But the other islands, as much as 500, say Rongelap, was another atoll 500 miles away. The nuclear ash drone fell down on Rongelap, and the people didn't know what it was. The children played in it. It was radioactive ash. And that became so radioactive, finally the U.S. agreed to evacuate them. But then the idea was to put them back, so we put them back, and the whole food chain was radioactive. So now they've put on a little island by the American Air Base. They provide workers for the field, but the soldiers call it the slum of the Pacific. So it destroyed the culture of a whole atoll 500 miles from the test. And the American government says, well, we're sorry, we didn't know it was going to do this. We didn't realize. Okay, so
that's where, and somehow this has resulted in a lawsuit? Is that right?
No, this is not a lawsuit. So should we go to that lawsuit in the Marshall Islands?
Yeah, well,
we better, or we won't have time for other things.
Yeah, well, just quickly, what's happened is that finally the government of the Marshall Islands is not a sort of puppet government that obeys the United States. It's a government that is speaking out for the Marshallese people, and they have brought this lawsuit. It is a lawsuit against all 9 nuclear powers, even though it was only the U.S. that destroyed their culture and their islands. And they're not asking for any money. What they're asking for is abide by the non-proliferation treaty that you signed in 1972 and ratified that said that you would work towards nuclear disarmament or nuclear abolition. Well, nuclear disarmament.
Hey, who are the 9 powers?
I can tell you, the United States and Russia are the 2 biggest ones. China, Britain, France. They're all on the Security Council and have the veto.
The Big Five, right.
Yeah. And then Pakistan never ratified the treaty and has continued to test and obtain nuclear weapons and helped others get them. India, the same, even though India was a Gandhian country. And then Israel,
Well, that's purported, right? That's the allegation, right?
Well, some of the tests, we have the seats, the equipment to tell when they test.
Right.
So it's estimated they have somewhere between 80 and 200.
Right.
And they neither deny nor affirm.
Right.
And that's a big problem in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And then North Korea, we've never ended that war.
Right.
63 years ago. And there was a truce or a pact, an armistice. And we promised elections, referendum about reunification, and all kinds of things. And we've never followed through on it. So when Bush started calling them part, well, I shouldn't go into detail, but what they're doing is acting out, trying to get the U.S. to notice and conclude the war. They want that war to end. They want to stop being treated as, we say part of the axis of evil.
That's North Korea, but getting back to the Marshall Islands.
I want to say one more thing about North Korea.
Okay.
The one person who's been able to keep bringing them back is Jimmy Carter.
Right.
In fact, Jimmy Carter and Colin Powell did it together. They can negotiate. But the neocons, the Bush Cheneys, they don't want to negotiate.
Right,
they need enemies.
Right.
Excuse me for saying that, but I think it's true.
Okay, so let's
back
get back
to
to the
Marshall
lawsuit.
Islands.
Yeah.
Well, this is a very important initiative of finally, in a sense, a victim of the
Who
nuclear.
is living
weapons.
there in the Marshall Islands? What kind of?
The Marshallese people.
Right.
They're island people. They're similar to the people of Micronesia.
In the Pacific.
They're Malay people, I would say, on the whole.
Right.
But they've been there for
Right.
centuries, thousands
So we
of
just
years.
want people to know about this. I mean,
Right.
actually, we'd like to talk about two other initiatives that WILPF is very involved in, and one is what is called Proposition 1, which is a resolution that's in
It's a bill
Congress,
in Congress.
a bill before Congress that is supported by the Congresswoman from Washington, D.C., and a few other representatives, and we want to get Peter Welch to support this. And this is could you explain what it is?
Yeah, this is a bill that calls for abolition of nuclear weapons. It calls for the U.S. to lead the way. It's not saying unilaterally disarm or anything like that, but for the U.S. government to begin the procedure toward negotiations. And that's what the Marshallese are asking for, actually.
Negotiations to eliminate nuclear weapons, is that correct? And that would be in the main powers that hold nuclear weapons?
They
that would
have
be the
to negotiate
with each other.
Yeah, and the rest of us, everybody will want to ratify it in the end. And so this is what they're calling for.
Did you say there was another, Robin?
Pardon?
And and that leads into the main issue, which is how to really implement this legally, basically,
Right.
because the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as I said, was signed and ratified in 1972. And you know, Carol says this is the most popular and widespread affirmed and ratified treaty that exists.
There are
right?
only 4 nations that have never ratified it. And we've already talked about them: Pakistan, India.
Well, North Korea has come
Well,
in
North
and out.
Korea doesn't count because they belong.
And Israel hasn't signed it.
But Israel never has, yeah.
But Iran has, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's
Well, Iran's right now the strongest supporter of it anywhere.
and that's why this is so relevant right now, because everyone's talking about Iran. Iran has to abide by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They always have, but what's being implemented now, if this deal goes through, is that they will be the UN will have the ability to go in and check on them and so on and so forth. All that is written in the in the document that was signed by the United States and others in 1972. The other part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty is that the nations that have nuclear weapons have to diminish and work towards disarmament. That's written in the treaty. The nations that don't have nuclear weapons have to commit to not getting them and have to be willing to be inspected and all of this stuff. And that's what that Obama is trying to implement in Iran now, is to fulfill the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But the point is, this whole other aspect of it, applying to those nations that have nuclear weapons, is ignored. I mean, Iran brings it up now and then, but no one pays attention to it. We are meant to be diminishing the number of nuclear weapons, and we have been. I mean, between the United States and Russia, since the end of the Cold War, there are fewer nuclear, we're aiming fewer nuclear warheads at each other. I think there's 16,000.
Now there were 50,000, so it's been a big come down.
Yeah, yeah.
But we could still destroy the world several times over.
But also, I mean, there has been an escalation, really, of the tensions between the United States and Russia, which seems to me very dangerous.
Well, and not only that, every country that has nuclear weapons is increasing, improving them, is spending billions of dollars to upgrade them in different ways. This is in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. You know, we insist Iran fulfill it, and we are totally ignoring it.
And we have signed it, correct?
And we have signed and ratified it. Yes.
But what you're saying is there are essentially two parts to it, and one is aimed at the big powers also reducing at least nuclear,
getting rid of
weapons, and they're not doing that. In fact, are they doing the opposite? Because you said both things. You said they have diminished, and yet they are updating them.
Yeah.
This is a book that we did in WILPF, which is done by many people from the nuclear powers. I'm not sure if
Can
they
you get this graphic? This is, I like this, of this poor guy trying to hold
but the whole thing is called Assuring Destruction Forever. And this is on the WILPF website. You can download it, and it goes through every country that's a nuclear power and how they're now building up. Not only that, WILPF is now issuing this. You can download it from the website. Every year they're doing a new edition. It's starting 2013, I think 2012 maybe, 2014, 2015. You can download that and see, and they're getting worse, not better. So
how do you mean it's getting worse?
It's getting worse. More weapons. Some of them are actually expanding the number of weapons. Others are upgrading, making them more destructive, more. They're making money on it, the weapons people.
So the thing is that the non-nuclear countries are saying we've had enough. You know,
which is most of the world, correct?
Yes, and most of the population. The NPT is called Non-Proliferation Treaty. It meets every 5 years. It met in May. And this May, and Carol will tell about the new initiative that has happened, because the problem is that the nuclear nations say, well, we don't have the legal structure to, in a sense, to follow through or for the NPT to be implemented. So the non-nuclear countries have met, and they've developed something called that will bridge the legal gap. It's called Bridging the Legal Gap. Is that it?
Well, that's
and you can
what we're
explain
talking about
how
here.
did that get created?
Yeah. All right, so we're running out of time, so I'll go quickly on this. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, thanks to Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General, and now, I mean, thanks to Kofi Annan first, and now Ban Ki-moon, they've invited the, what do we call them, NGOs, civil society to come. And so the ones who are working so hard on abolishing nuclear weapons are right there with the governments, and they even have a half a day to present their position and what they think needs to be done. So they've been entering into it from the beginning. And about a bit ago, 2007, well, let me say the medical profession is particularly worried about this because they know what it's like.
Right.
So the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, in this country it's PSR,
Right.
Physicians for Social Responsibility. They had an initiative, and WILPF contributed a great deal to this, and several other civil society organizations, to draft a model treaty to show what could be done. And so this book contains the model treaty, but it also contains pages and pages for discussion and study about the weaknesses and strengths.
Right, and the main weakness is that the main powers don't really do
Oh,
anything.
yes, of course,
Yeah.
but what the physicians are doing is showing the nuclear powers, this is what you need to do.
Right.
Look at this, see what's wrong, make it stronger. Don't use this itself, but start thinking about it.
And how
But
about
the nuclear powers have pretty much ignored it as far as we know. But the non-nuclear powers, they're the ones who introduced it. It's now an official UN document. Ban Ki-moon saw that every government got it. So here's the beginning.
And then the Red Cross came in.
Yeah.
And I think the
So
Red
they
Cross
had this,
is well
But,
known.
well, let me just say this and then go ahead and say it. The physicians did this, and of course the Red Cross knew they'd done it. But the nuclear powers were not about. They're interested in keeping their nuclear
Right.
weapons. Not everybody in our government, but the neocon types and the neoliberals. We've got them, we're going to keep them. They give us the power we need. Go ahead.
And about the Red Cross, you
Well,
were gonna
no,
say.
when you told us that the Red Cross was involved with this at the beginning, because they said there's no way we can perform our tasks in time of a nuclear explosion, because we can't go in and save people because we'll die too. So this is crazy, and we have to make sure that we don't have this. So you have a booklet called Unspeakable Suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
This is done by WILPF. So the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, the Muslim group, together started a campaign for 4 years on, I'm looking at the picture, on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear war. And Reaching Critical Will edited this book, which is all the different consequences, lavishly illustrated.
Right.
And they saw that every government had copies. Every delegate that comes to the NPT has a copy. And at the same time, the Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War, this big medical organization that works closely with the Red Cross, they created a new organization under their umbrella
Right.
called ICAN. And the ICAN is based in Australia, but it is geared to achieving a nuclear ban treaty. Okay, if the governments of the world, the U.S., etc., if they can't negotiate and we've given them all this help, then we're just going to ban them ourselves and shame them. I mean, they won't ratify it, perhaps. Maybe eventually they will. But they'll be outcasts.
So this
if the whole world lines up against them.
It is sort of a new initiative that, again, of
It
course,
is
it
a new
has no
initiative.
military force behind it.
Right.
It's a matter
Or
of,
no courts really behind it.
Right.
of a moral
Crusade.
crusade, exactly. But all these countries are getting together about that. So that happened this May at the MPT meeting. They were stiff-armed by the United States, as usual. But there were a number of people came from around the world. I think one of the biggest gatherings of protesters. In fact, Carol will be speaking Tuesday at 6:30 at the Peace and Justice Center, and we have a graphic there. You can see it. Behind the picture of Carol is a picture taken from, I think it's Union Square, isn't it? Prior to walking to the United Nations in May of 2015. So people came from Japan and all over to really petition the UN to pay attention to this concept of closing the legal gap in the abolition of nuclear weapons.
And the UN is paying attention, and it's particularly the General Assembly,
Right, of course,
which
yeah.
is our most democratic part. And so this is where all this is developing. So this is the most recent publication of Reaching Critical Will, along with the British Article 36, it's called. And it's called Filling the Legal Gap on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And what they were doing here is looking, you can download this from Reaching Critical Will. It's also, I think, on ICANN. What they were doing was looking at the looking at what the legal gaps are. And interestingly enough, the international law they're looking at is all the treaties that have been negotiated for nuclear-free zones. I think we may have said at the beginning, half of the world now is a nuclear-free zone. This is something the people and the governments have done themselves.
Right. We wanted to show the video, or
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Would there be
Yeah,
time now?
you can start.
Are
Well,
we
we're going
ready?
to keep talking,
Yeah.
but show the video.
Okay, we have a remarkable 15-minute video here of a timeline of all the nuclear explosions in the world, starting from, we know, 1945. The first bomb that exploded before Hiroshima was in Trinity. It was called the Trinity bomb. What state was that? That was
Actually,
Mexico,
I kind
I
of think it was done in New Mexico rather
so
than
there
Nevada.
we saw the explosion there, and then this timeline, which shows at the top the chronology. On the far right is the date, and then the month is right next to it. And we see that 8th month of 1945, oops, where was that explosion? There was Hiroshima, and now it's going to Okinawa.
Nagasaki, in other words.
Oh, excuse me, Nagasaki.
They don't show that brightly, do they? Can people see them?
That's a weird one. Okay. And now we basically look at the whole world, and we learn how the United States kept testing nuclear weapons. There, those. Yeah. Thanks for the sound. The blue bright light is the U.S. Explosions, and it shows where they are taking place.
It took them a while to get organized. They had to build more bombs.
Yeah, sure.
They
And
used up all they
spend a lot
had.
of money on this too. Right?
Yeah.
And those explosions you just saw, that was in the Marshall Islands, north of Australia. Up, okay, now the Soviet Union, 47?
It didn't take them long to catch up.
Right.
The funny thing is, are we seeing the explosions? Let's see.
That's in the United States.
Yeah, there we continue in New Mexico and also on the Marshall Islands. The Soviet Union's getting into the act.
These are tests.
Tests, yes, above ground tests until 1963. And then it's underground. It's amazing the number of nuclear tests that took place in the United States. And
Right.
you know, the downwinders have been suffered from that, downwind from the nuclear testing.
Even if it's below ground or not?
Well, I think some pollution gets above ground, even in underground aquifers.
Oh, right, right, right.
So if we could, as they go on, keep your eye on it and certainly speak when there's a big deal. But you've already seen the tests on the Marshall Islands and the effect that had on Pacific Islands there. And now the Brits are testing in Australia.
Brits tested in Australia. Did the Australians consent to that, or did they even know about it?
They probably didn't know about it.
Well, see,
It's
at this
very
point,
secret.
all three nations are testing.
Right.
Russia, U.S., and
What year is it?
All right. Wow, now the big bomb.
But it's around this time that we started getting the Golden Rule boat ship trying to sail into the Marshall Islands to stop the test. That was a bunch of Quakers. Then the Phoenix, that was a whole Quaker family, sailed down to the Marshall Islands to stop the tests. And the Japanese fishing boat was caught and got the radiation. So
I think that we're not seeing the whole world tests in Africa.
oh, we're not seeing
well, they
Africa.
come.
Can you zoom out a little bit?
In the United States, I wonder if Americans even know that, you know?
Yeah.
I'm beginning to find out, and this is one reason for our skyrocketing cancer.
Right, of
Yeah.
course.
If we can talk a little bit as we go along, you saw what happened in the Marshall Islands. Pretty soon the French will start testing in Polynesia.
Okay, the French are on, and even China. Now, China is the red sign down below, so China is also testing.
Yeah. And
Good
so-
China test.
In Semipalatinsk in
Russia?
Western China.
Western China.
Uh-huh.
So this is why the island people have come in. All the island people are in this movement.
Green is Tahiti.
That's the French.
The French living on an island also.
And they tested until 1998. And so they're still suffering there. And they are actually suing the French for help and not getting it.
When these nations tested, you're saying that they say that they didn't know that it would have consequences? Are they saying that?
When people challenge them, they would say we didn't know it was going to be so bad. But
These
they
were
were
colonies.
just doing it anyway, though people were telling them and protesting. And so this is the point we start to get the work on nuclear-free zones, because the people wanted to keep the testing out.
Sure.
And then they wanted to keep the nuclear submarines out. They wanted to keep the big powers from stationing nuclear weapons in
Right.
their country.
I think Scotland wanted to do that, and that's one of the reasons it wanted to become independent.
Yeah.
It's an interesting movement because it seems also that those nations that want nuclear-free zones are small. They're small
There are
nations.
big ones too,
Like,
Kazakhstan. The Stans are all nuclear-free zones.
Okay, one more country has come in.
Austria is a nuclear-free zone.
France is now
testing.
Testing,
Well, you said Tahiti earlier.
or is that England at the bottom? Sorry,
We decided it was China, I thought.
China's at the bottom, and what is the flag of the other country there?
That's France, I think.
Can you
No, it's not
tell
France.
us?
It's not France, because France is bleu,
But it
blanc, rouge.
France is the tricolor, and that's
I
on
know.
the top there. So I think it must be England came into nuclear power.
That's not the English flag. That's not the Union Jack.
Okay, so this is a period of time between when and when?
In 1945 and 1998. This
Can't
map,
read the times up there.
this map stops in 1998, but our TV viewers hopefully are able to read the on the top, which is it's going along consecutively every year, and each month of every year, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see that this was a mania of the countries to explode bombs. What were they learning with each of these bombs? Why did they have to do so many explosions?
You tell me, I mean, do you have a theory about it? What were they doing? Just
They wanted to make them better at killing. But there's another reason we mustn't forget. In the United States, Britain, the capitalist countries, there may be good things about capitalism, but they're profiting on these tests. They're getting big contracts from the U.S. government. The investors are lining their pockets. The banks are making money on it. So this is very profitable for some people. And a lot of our economy is built on this kind of thing. And we're working, for instance, I'm not banking with Bank of America, Wells Fargo, the big banks, because they all are profiting on nuclear weapons, and in the past they profited on the tip.
Good.
okay, so is that the end of the video? Is it? No?
The end is when it is.
Yeah.
It ends.
Oh, I thought that.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, no.
So we're approaching the end of our hour. So can we just conclude
We
with
have
a little
5
bit
minutes, she says.
about the what's happening? So you can see why the countries, non-nuclear powers, are getting fed up with what the nuclear powers are doing. Destroying our own, they're destroying the world without having a war. So what this is based on, they want this ban treaty. It's based on these nuclear-free zones. And as I said, half the world, it includes the STAN countries, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, where the Russians tested. There are 5 of them. They are now a nuclear-free zone. No nuclear weapons allowed there. And the island countries, they have a treaty in the South Pacific. The first ones to get it were Latin America.
Good.
No
Really?
tests have ever taken place there.
Never. Never? That's great.
Never.
Yeah.
They've kept the nuclear out, and they still are. They've now declared themselves a zone of peace. They've told the U.S., you can come back, you can be part of our overall all-American Council, but you must treat us as equals. We are not.
And they had to allow Cuba.
Yeah.
They had to,
And
right.
Cuba's been one of the leaders in the abolition and disarmament movement.
Right.
They want general and complete disarmament as the goal. Okay, so each of these nuclear-free zones, now Africa, I think maybe one nation is still outside. Their treaty is recent and fast. They've ratified it.
Right,
So they
yeah.
are now a nuclear-free zone. The U.S. is trying to get in there. So then Oslo, Norway, invited any nation of the world to come and work on this idea. How do we close the legal gap? And that was in 2013. 122 nations came. They were mostly the little nations, the poor nations. Some of them can't even afford to send delegations or ambassadors to the UN when things that are very important to them are discussed. But they came to this treaty to talk, which is outside the UN. They're trying to go outside the UN because the UN has stopped the negotiation. The U.S. has stopped treaty negotiations within the UN.
Okay, so how are we doing for time?
We have a few more minutes.
Okay, so that's what's going on right now.
Then came the second meeting. Mexico, right below us, said, we can't stop here. We'll have the next one. So the Mexican government, this time 148 nations came. Pakistan and India have come from the beginning. And then the foreign minister said, wow, look at that, China, I guess that is.
Oh my God.
Or is it Russia? It's Russia.
And China, right?
We can't turn back now. We have to go on. So the Austrians agreed to have a meeting in December.
Of this year?
And that was very courageous of the Austrians because they're right in the middle of the NATO country.
Exactly.
In fact, Norway is a NATO country, but they had a socialist government when they initiated it. So in December they met. The Austrians circulated what we're now calling the Humanitarian Pledge, which nations can sign that they will support closing the legal gap. WILPF is working very hard.
Right.
There are now 113 nations as of last week who have signed on that pledge.
Okay, so I'd like to just point out that the video has ended. It ended in it traced the nuclear explosions up until 1998. And do you know what happened after that?
The French stopped testing.
That's when the French stopped
testing. They joined the nuclear non-proliferation.
And so there have been no even underground explosions?
We still have India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea is testing right now.
So what about the U.S.? Do we know?
Underground. Lots of underground testing.
But not since
and
98.
We will not ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty because I shouldn't be partisan, but it happens to be Republican. They want to be able to resume testing if it reaches the point they need to. Now they don't really need to, but they'd like to test the weapons they've been designing.
Okay.
So, anyway, let's rejoice that the nations that do not have nuclear weapons are taking it into their own hands and trying to get our nation and Britain and France and China and Russia and India and Pakistan and North Korea is easy, that's ratify in a minute, to work on nuclear non-proliferation, on nuclear abolition. And one of the leaders in this movement right now, and has been off and on, is Iran.
Iran.
At the last nuclear...
Iran, right.
Iran. They want this treaty, the big treaty, and they're working for it as hard as they can.
So I'd like to invite everyone watching to come and hear Carol and tell others to come to hear Carol at the Peace and Justice Center this Tuesday at 6:30 down on the waterfront. And Carol will be there, and we'd like to let people know about more of the details of this extraordinary new opening leading to the possibility of nuclear abolition. So thanks,
Sandy.
Sandy.
Everybody for coming or for listening, and maybe we'll do this again sometime. Thanks for being here. And thank you, Carol.